This is a painting by Percy Kelly. He did it in 1976, and it's one of my favourites. He must have liked it as well, because he actually signed it fully and put the date on it. But there's a puzzle as well, because in 1976 he was living in Pembrokeshire, in St David's, and he must have either used an old sketch that he did when he lived in Cumbria, or he may have made the sketch at some point when he came back on one of his visits north. Crosby Villas is a long, rather boring terrace, dare I say, on the road between Maryport and Carlisle. We know it's definitely Crosby Terrace because that's Skiddaw in the background, and it matches in everything except the composition, which he usually changed a little bit to make it better, and the colours there. It is a long grey terrace, and this is a wonderful terrace dressed in carnival colours. The two videos I've done about Percy, that I've put up on YouTube, have by far attracted a lot more attention than I really expected, or did I? There is something irresistible about Percy's work and about his life, which is really intriguing. You've listened to me telling you the stories on YouTube, but have you wondered what Percy sounded like? Or what he looked like? Or what manner of person he was? In 1994, a year after Percy's death, I mounted the first exhibition of his work. I put just 100 paintings up in the gallery, and drawings as well. And it was a sensation. It was a sellout. People queued on the doorstep of the gallery for a long time to get in first and get one. Most people had never really heard of him before my catalogue arrived or the attendant publicity that went on. I did some interviews for television and wrote articles and press releases and so on. But also, quite a lot of people came who had actually known Percy, not as a painter particularly, but as a person. And they came and told me their stories. They came from London and from Norfolk, and a few came from St David's in Pembrokeshire, and all over the place. So I kept a notebook on my desk and recorded the things that they were telling me. I just made little notes. When I was cataloguing the whole body of his work, I came across these two paintings. They're of Norfolk, and they are of Caston Church, which was only a stone's throw from Rockland St Peter, where Percy lived. And the one on the bottom right is not really finished, is it? You can see it's not finished. In fact, Percy took that photograph of that, which I found among his things, and finished it later. And I know that it's the same painting as the one he photographed, because on the bottom right-hand corner, there is some writing. Very interesting writing. It says, in Percy's handwriting, Anglia Television, 17th of March, 1981. Now that will be just after they moved from Pembrokeshire to Norfolk. I rang, after all the shouting had stopped and we'd done the first exhibition and I got everything catalogued, I rang Anglia Television and they put me through to their library, and they managed to find some footage for me. Would you like to see him painting that painting? The one on the bottom right? I think this lockdown seems to have gone on forever. I think people are getting depressed and bored and fed up with it. So I've got a plan. Joan David was very important in the Kelly story. She still is. Joan was the person who helped me to get the work back to Cumbria. She'd first become aware of Percy in 1983, when she saw a painting in somebody's house, and she wrote to him about buying a painting. Now that was anathema to Percy. There was no way he wanted to sell. But he liked her letter because she praised him a lot, and he liked a bit of flattery. And so he went back to his usual self. He defaulted to Percy saying, well, perhaps, maybe, being very vague about it, hadn't really got very much at the time, so on. But just a few months later, because he replied to Joan and she replied back, so a little bit of correspondence had set up. But just a few months later, in that year, 1983, Chris, Percy's second wife, decided she could take no more and left him. She couldn't take any more, in fact, of the poverty. They were once again in another semi-derelict house, and she was the one pushing the wheelbarrow and the cement and the breeze blocks and so on. And they were living in a house that was stuffed absolutely full of wonderful paintings. And Chris, unlike the first wife, really appreciated paintings, and she realised what value there was. So in 1983, she went off to see her son, who'd just started at uni in Brighton. And when it came for time for Percy to go and pick her up off the train in Attleborough, she rang and said she wasn't coming back ever, and Percy never saw her again. She sent a friend to pick up her things. So Percy turned to Joan, his new friend, and the letters that just kept coming from her, and he kept replying to her. Joan faithfully replied to every single letter. Some of them were 20 or 30 pages long. They were mostly illustrated. There were very few that didn't have a drawing on of any of those pages. And he would send 2 or 3 a week, but she replied faithfully to every one. That woman needs a medal. And she actually put up an exhibition for him in her friend's house in Troutbeck in 1984, after Chris had gone, and her solicitor was catching up with Percy because Chris had done so much work on the house that she really wanted to buy something else. She needed alimony to build a life for herself. So Joan actually convinced him, and it was very, very hard, that he should have another exhibition. He just hated exhibitions, didn't want to do it. But Joan had some friends in a house near her. She was living in Troutbeck at the time, near Windermere, and some friends of hers with a beautiful big house had said that they would house this exhibition. And finally, I think she had to be quite brutal with Percy, but he gave in because he realised, I think she put the facts to him quite boldly, that if he didn't raise some money from selling some paintings, he would be homeless. And at that, he decided he would have the exhibition. And of course, a lot of that sold as well. And all these letters that Joan received over the next 10 years, and there was a chest full of them. Joan gave me access to all the letters, and I learned so much from them. I learned a lot about his early life, his time in the army, in the war, his friendship with Bill Hamilton, the head designer at Secker's Silk Mills, who discovered him originally. And that led on to some amazing connections with royalty and the aristocracy and so on. And also he wrote about the disastrous time they'd had living in St. David's and the move to Norfolk. And as the letters were illustrated, it also helped me to identify the location of some of the paintings that I was cataloguing. So I owed Joan a lot. She was a wonderful supporter and a wonderful encourager. This is a lovely charcoal, by the way. I'm just putting these up to cheer you up as you go along. When Joan had a mild stroke and moved into sheltered accommodation in Windermere, I suddenly decided that I shouldn't lose her memories. I should record her talking about Percy and her letters. So I hired a cameraman for a day. I then gathered any television footage I could find, and with the help of the visual link in Carlisle, who lent me their edit suite and pieced it all together for me, it resulted in this following 16-minute film, which I'm going to let you see. You may have seen it before at various exhibitions, and it was shown on a loop at the retrospective at Tully House in 2017-18. But there were a lot of people at that exhibition. More than 12,000 people came through, and it lasted 5 months. But there were a lot of people there, and many people told me they couldn't concentrate on it with everybody milling around. The schools came and were gripped by it, and they were lovely. They were delighted when they found some of the paintings referred to in the film. And they loved to see the paint box and so on and all the rest of it on the film and then find it in the gallery. It gave me a lot of pleasure to watch them discovering things. But anyway, I used the film of Joan and the other bits and pieces and the Anglia television film. And really, it's my tribute to Joan David, to whom I owe so much.
Percy Kelly was born in Workington in 1918 to a family of 7 children. He left school at 14, although he was highly talented in painting and drawing, and joined the postal service. He became sub-postmaster at Great Broughton in 1954, which he left in 1959 because he wanted to go to college to study printmaking. He couldn't get a grant because they considered him too old at 42, so he worked all the hours he could at Davonby Hospital and taught in a school in Wigton to generate the course fees, going to Carlisle College of Art in 1962, where he excelled himself. He was then taken up by Sir Nicholas Seckers, who commissioned a series of paintings of Seckers silk mills at Whitehaven. He then gave him an exhibition at Rosehill Theatre, followed by another at his Sloane Street showrooms, where 60s society was beginning to buy Percy's work.
I have been painting all my life, drawing, and I suppose it's been very difficult to finally become a full-time painter purely for economic reasons. Many years ago I did quite a lot of planned drawing, and in my army days I did a lot of graphs and layouts of railway lines, and I think this has probably influenced me a great deal. In some ways, probably why I've used black and white, to me the colours, and I see the fells not as something romantic, but as a pattern of shapes. And to me, using chalk, this I'm able to use the chalk and show this essential design. Sunsets and seascapes don't interest me, and I've looked towards the village and the conglomeration of electric poles and telegraph poles. This is another obsession of mine. This, particularly under certain conditions, seeing them jet black against the light of the sky. And of course, to me, they form a fascinating pattern of verticals and horizontals. And you find various thicknesses in the lines, and then at the background, or between all the lines, you get this huddle of rather marvellous buildings. Considering the form of these buildings, I prefer line, the expression of form, rather than colour. And of course, this gives me a great deal of licence. This marvellous pattern of different shapes contained in just a tiny village. I think this attracts one, but I feel a sense of urgency in getting this down before it does disappear, not only as to chronicle this particular area, but to get these shapes before they actually disappear, become dust.
Percy Kelly was beginning to make an impact on the art world, and it was at this point that he decided he didn't want to show or sell work. He wrote, "I cannot paint for monetary gain," and he opted out, left Cumbria, living first in Wales and then in Norfolk, which is where he died in 1993, leaving a wonderful collection of work. Percy Kelly loved writing to people, and he enjoyed illustrating these letters with a painting. He would do a watercolour on the paper, and when it was dry, in his beautiful script he would write to a friend with recollections and highly articulate descriptions of his everyday life. In the last 10 years of his life, he developed a unique friendship and correspondence with Joan David.
It all came about because I went to have supper with Mary Burkitt, the head of Abbot Hall, in her own house, and I'd never been in it before, and there were 2 pictures in the room, and I said, "Whoever's are those? I think they're marvellous." And she said, "Oh, a chap called Percy Kelly, a Cumbrian artist." And I said, "Is he ever likely to have an exhibition? Because I would simply love to have one." And she said, "Well, I don't know whether he will or not. He's down in Norfolk, but write and say you like them and ask him." And I wrote and said I thought his pictures were wonderful and would I ever have a chance of buying one, you see. And I got immediately an illustrated letter. "Thank you so much for your letter, which arrived today. Your very kind and appreciative words about my work really touched me. It's so rare to hear such compliments, and because I'm experiencing the darkest period of my life, I got quite a lift. I will keep in touch regarding my visit to Cumberland, and I must thank you again for writing to me. Sincerely and kindly, Bob Kelly." Incidentally, Fen Street is only a mile away. There is a letterbox which we often use there, strapped to a short pole and covered in ivy. It's a quite charming way to post one's letters. He loved to keep his own work around him. He wanted it to be all around his house. He couldn't bear to part with it. And latterly he would only ever sell pictures to people he really was fond of and felt would appreciate them. People would ask if they could have a picture, and he'd made an excuse and just say no, it wasn't finished and that sort of thing, you know.
It was at this point Joan David met Percy for the first time. She and Mary Burkitt, another of Percy Kelly's close friends, visited him at his Norfolk cottage.
And in the meanwhile, he had written me, I don't know, probably 20 letters, I should think. And they were almost as if he knew me already, telling me all the details of his life and everything. He just poured out all his problems to me. And he also poured out a lot of the history of his life. Because I think at the back of his mind, he always expected one day there would be a biography written about him. And I think that's what it was for. But there was a lot about the present and, the people in Norfolk and so on and so forth. I mean, really, the letters were a mixture of extreme interest and a bit of boredom, really. And then he described in great detail all this work he was doing himself. And he drew all these things he did in these letters to me. I mean, it's fascinating in a way, but heavens above, I wasn't really interested in how he got sheets of something onto the roof, you know. But there it was, pages and pages of all this detail. And then I thought, no, I'll tell him a bit of news about myself. I went somewhere or saw an exhibition or something. He never referred to practically anything that I'd written in my letter. No. He did occasionally, but it was very occasional. The letters were entirely about himself. Well, you know, I sometimes wondered if I exaggerated my admiration a little bit to please him. It was very genuine, but all the same one, because you knew he liked it, you tended to lay it on. There are all these marvellous letters I could show you, but the envelopes that they came in, not every one, obviously, but a huge number. I think he'd seal a letter up and think, oh dear, I haven't put much in the way of pictures for Joan in that, so I must do something on the envelope.
It was obvious these envelopes were made larger than the illustrated letters so that they wouldn't have to be folded. Kelly not only sent the letters for Joan's enjoyment, but also knew they would be kept to enhance the collection of his work.
Yes, and you know, the amazing thing was that the postman delivered every single one, because he kept a list of when he'd posted them and so on, and I kept a list of what had arrived, and it didn't appear that over 10 years not a single one had been stolen.
Percy Kelly struggled to be admitted to art college to study printmaking. He was initially rejected as too old at 42 and unable to compete with the creativity of young people, but he went on to excel himself and demonstrate exceptional observational skills and a fantastic eye for detail.
My imagery started from when I was very young. I didn't decide to do the industrial landscape as opposed to the Lake District. It's because I was born in that environment. You see, as a child, I walked around the docks and loved boats and all the cranes and the tramp steamers and what have you. And that started, I suppose, because I was born with a particular gift. that it developed, and then I got engulfed in the fact I had to work for a living. One has to live, so I sell paintings, but it saddens me when I have to, and this sadness is often shared because it's something which you probably wouldn't see again. There are some treasured ones which I would never sell, and all my early work is all contained and kept. It will never be sold, it's going to be kept. These are the paintings that were done during the 2-year period I was drawing and working at Allenby. I walked the Solway for many weeks and months, and I'd take a notebook with me. I thought a great deal of how I'd painted in the sort of English school, this narrow sort of field of painting, and why I did certain things, why I used shadows, why I put spouts on buildings. I came to understand that many paintings are just acquired by people because of probably some sentimental association. My wife and I lived in Wales, and I am an etcher, as you know, and I discovered, because of the damp conditions and the humidity in southwest Wales, that I wasn't able to do any etching at all. But we felt that in East Anglia, where the conditions are certainly drier, that I would find conditions work. To get to know a landscape or to feel a landscape takes considerable time. There are certain aspects which are difficult to come to terms with, and that is the buildings. Because in Cumberland, and to Wales to a certain extent, the buildings are very simple and solid and square shaped, but here you get the eaves and the pantiles, a broken texture, which is not easy for me, because I like the strong, direct drawing, which you've probably seen. That's but on the other hand, there is an aspect which I want to see, and that is in the summertime, because it's England, and I love England. And I learned from experience that you read about painting and people acquire styles of painting. When I began to write to friends, and particularly young children, there's no point in sending a landscape or what have you. So I would draw them engines and boats, things which would give them pleasure. And I began to explore the use of colour instead of the dark umbers and blacks of the West Cumberland landscape, pure colour, which I enjoy, and it gave me a sense of freedom together with pleasure in giving.
He was wonderful with colour. I mean, many of the pictures I've seen at Castlegate and some of the ones I have, colour is wonderful. But over against that, when he got these depressed moods, which he did get, he would do these great black and white things in charcoal and so on, that a lot of my friends say they wouldn't want to own them. They'd find them too depressing.
Kelly would improvise and paint on virtually any suitable surface, including cornflakes packets and the back of letters he received.
And of course he could make a lot of his own materials. I mean, he could make, if he was on the seashore and saw something he wanted to paint, he would pick up a bit of string or rope or something off the seashore and divide it out yes. and make it into a paintbrush.
Yes.
And that sort of thing. And there was some occasion when he had no fresh water and he just used salt water from the sea.
In a letter to Joan written in 1984, Kelly describes how, on a visit to London, he felt a painting he was doing of the Tower of London from a nearby cafe lacked substance and texture. Using diluted ketchup and tea as paint, and dust from the floor to shade his picture, he again improvised and created a unique painting with a wonderful story attached.
After Mary and I had been down and found him in such a suicidal state over his wife having left and so on, it became fairly obvious in the letters to me that followed that he was in a great state because he thought he might have to sell the cottage to give his wife half. So he was desperately short of money. I mean, he just really hadn't any money at all. And so I suggested that we gave an exhibition for him up here in Troutbeck, because I had a friend who had a beautiful large house with space who was very interested in art. And so I asked PK if he'd like me to get this organised, you see, and he was somewhat reluctant because of not liking to have exhibitions, but I think he realised he must have some money. So we got this organised, and he came up in May 84, I think it was, and he sent me all the pictures, a few at a time, and then eventually, of course, they were all put up in this lovely house, which was a beautiful setting, and we sent invitations to people all over the country. And everybody came. It was absolutely marvellous. But it was quite strange having PK to stay because, as so many brilliant, talented artists are, he was a very strange man, really. And he was awkward about food. He wanted baked beans out of a tin every night.
Although the 10-year correspondence and friendship between them grew out of simple artistic appreciation, it developed into a unique and special relationship valued by them both.
It was fortunate that I came on the scene just then, incredibly fortunate for me, and I think I filled something in his life that was sort of needed in someone he could confide in and trust and talk to and so on. I just loved the friendship and all it brought me. I mean, I really think, looking back on it, it was one of the biggest privileges in my life to have known him and had this friendship. And the strange thing is that I suppose over all those years I didn't see him more than 8 times.
Percy Kelly wrote, "I would rather starve than sell one piece of work. But I know when I depart this world, people will stop and wonder at the beauty and truth that I have endeavoured to portray."
You see, it's 4 years or so since he died now, and there have been all these various things, your exhibitions and so on. And I think at the beginning he might have been a bit shattered. But I think by now he's probably thoroughly pleased.
I hope you enjoyed that. I enjoyed making it anyway. I just want to point out 2 rather bizarre things. You see his little MG was GW57. If you play it through again, and I reckon a lot of you will, have a look more closely at the soft top, because obviously it must have rotted away over the years. And Percy, with his money-saving and do-it-yourself skills that he thought he had, he used a piece of his canvas to redo the roof very badly. And you get a close-up at one point as you were. I don't know whether you picked up on that. But since he died, and I got this information and saw this film, I tried to find out what had happened to GW57 after Percy had died or whenever he sold it. You can go through registers and things, and I found no sign of it. But I was a bit disappointed because I thought it might have a painting on the other side or something like that. And you never know, it might turn up one day. The other thing is that his statement that he hoped that after his death everything would be kept, especially the early work. Well, it's a shame. He should have made provision for that because he died intestate and his son Brian inherited. And Brian just wanted everything sold. And so when I heard him say that sentence, Joan David and I had a plan whereby we could retain and fulfill his wishes, but his son had other ideas. And everything was sold. And I still have some pieces left, which I have on the Percy Kelly website, and pieces from the estate, which didn't get sold, on percykelly.co.uk, you will see there's a section of works for sale. But anyway, that's beside the point. I'm adding to my knowledge all the time. I got so much from those letters and then from the film and so on. And I enjoy sharing this with you and all the other people that have watched it at all these exhibitions. But just a word of warning, it is covered by copyright. And so you are breaking the law if you copy it or any of Kelly's images. I have signed with the different companies that let me have bits of film and so on, and that must not be breached. And I just hope you really enjoy it and that you really, it cheers you up a bit in lockdown. This last one that I'm showing you is a painting I hung on to for a long time because I was unable to title it or to nail down where it was. And finally, when I did the Percy Kelly trails, of which one of them is Allenby, I drove up the road a little way just to try and see if there was anything else that I'd missed. And just as I was crossing over that bridge, I realised that that was the identification of the painting that I'd been looking for a very long time. So that at last, it's almost the same. The bit by the bridge has grown up a bit with sediment and so on, but it's very much the same. So this was made in memory of Joan David. I shall always be grateful to her.